Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz pianist and composer Julian Shore. He was born and raised in Narragansett, Rhode Island, and was singing to his father's playing on the piano while reciting Bach as a child. From there, the music would become a bigger part of his world. He would go on to learn from the great Hal Crook in Rhode Island and go on to the Berklee College of Music. Then he would make his way to New York City. Over the course of our conversation, he talked about living in New York, his new album, 2016's Which Way Now, and when I told him the cover of this album reminded me of the Beatles' Revolver, he said that was one of his favorite albums of all time. He's a big talent in the jazz world, so get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Hey, thanks for taking some time out for me today. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out. I know you're always busy, but in your words, your own words, give me kind of a snapshot of things that are going on lately in your world.
Been doing a lot of sideman work over the last couple weeks. I guess when the record came out, I did some touring around with the record, Boston, New York, and LA, and other places. Let's see. I just played at the Kennedy Center last week with Colleen Clark, this great young drummer composer. And then next week I'm playing at Carnegie Hall with a Croatian singer named Ines Trikovic. That's with Marcus Gilmore and Gilad Hexelman and some other folks. Then a couple days after that I'm playing the Blue Note with great young singer named Hiromi Suda, and that's Brazilian music, Rogério Boccato and Petros Klampanis. I don't know, I guess that's like the last couple weeks at a glance.
Yeah, that's cool. Do the butterflies or the awe ever go away of playing in such hallowed institutions of jazz and music?
No way. I mean, I definitely continue to have butterflies before pretty much any gig, to be honest. I mean, I think people who say otherwise are either lying or jaded. I don't know,
Yeah.
There's so much risk involved in what we do if you're doing it right, at least in my opinion. If you're really trying to improvise, you're going to be taking some risks. I think no matter how prepared you are, if you're really, truly improvising, there's going to be some butterflies there.
Absolutely. I got to say before we get into my question about Which Way Now, when I immediately saw that album cover come up, I just thought about the Beatles' Revolver. Just kind of the way, the way everything's kind of etched, and it has that vibe. But I want to ask you this. Talk to me about this album, Which Way Now? What kind of creative forces went into this? How do you feel about the final product?
Well, I mean, it was definitely a labor of love. It took a long time to put together, and, it's funny you say Revolver. I mean, that's probably might be my favorite complete musical statement of all time. And
right on.
I'm sure the, production, the songwriting, the musical ability, like every little aspect of that has definitely, hopefully, worked its way into, how I define myself as a musician, Yeah, Which Way Now came together. There was some songs and smaller works that I'd been writing over a few years, and I sort of saw that they were connected in a bunch of different ways as I was sort of putting them together and as I was building this body of music to present. I'd been working with the same band for the first time in a while over many gigs, because usually, in New York, it's hard to keep a band together with everybody always on the move. So I kind of made that a point to keep the core group together as best I could. So, those two things kind of feed off each other. The music gets written for specific guys, and they help lend their efforts, their suggestions, all that stuff, and that kind of can help build the music as a whole, So
absolutely.
So yeah, it just sort of, it was a symbiosis, just kept growing, and then it got to the point where it's like, okay, I got to put this down, while the music still feels really relevant to me too, there's nothing more tragic than realizing like these songs really don't represent me anymore, and I kind of missed that window to like really honestly record them.
How does a kid from Rhode Island grow up to become a jazz musician? How did you acquire that love?
Well, that's a really good question. My dad was in like a big time like Rhode Island rock band, and I mean he sells ancient art now, but when he was growing up he was in a band and he played organ and keyboards and piano and stuff. He's always been a really important musical voice for me because he was really into the Beatles and really into Bach. Those were kind of his big guys, and he would always be playing that at home. Basically, while I was a kid, I would hear him play some fugues, some inventions, and then some of my favorite, Beatles songs and stuff. So that kind of got me into music in general. And then in Rhode Island, there's this like legendary master educator named Hal Crook. Basically, you can look at anyone in the last 30 years or so, and almost all of them have gone through him in some capacity. I heard he was kind of, the guy, and I started getting into jazz a little bit through the Litchfield Jazz Camp, which my mom just like signed me up for because she's like, oh, you like music, this would be a good summer camp. And then, I really got inspired by the people there and wanted to pursue it, during the year. So I contacted Hal, and then the rest was history because he really just, blew my mind wide open on what this art form is, and coached me and helped me get a scholarship to Berklee and all the rest of that stuff. So maybe that could have only happened in Rhode Island because that's where Hal is. I don't know.
Sure. That's cool. So you mentioned the profound impact Revolver played on you, but from the jazz world, what album really influenced you and swayed you, or what musician did as you were growing up?
Well, the first guy that I really got into, I think a lot of pianists have the same guy as Bill Evans. He just seems to be like this great middle ground between, a lot of jazz language, and he himself, was coming out of Bud Powell and bebop and stuff, but he had that kind of very clear classical influence and great technique and just beautiful sound. So I think a lot of pianists are pulled to him right off the bat, and I sure was. And it was mostly pianists at first. Tommy Flanagan I was really into too, from listening to NPR. Eric in the evening, he would always start his program with Tommy Flanagan playing this ballad piece, the Horace Silver ballad.
Yeah.
And, it's beautiful, beautiful. And, of course, I could sing every note from hearing it so many times. And my friend's dad, who was a jazz aficionado, he gave me Wayne Shorter's record Night Dreamer. And then it was kind of all over, like, it's just, for me, that just changed everything. And I've been, Wayne's been my favorite composer ever since. And then I just started getting into Miles around that era, and then started working my way backwards to Errol Garner and Art Tatum, and, and then just tried to keep exploring all the way through,
Absolutely. The immaculate jazz reverse engineering, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
So you go to Berklee, as you touched on, and you're learning with Danilo Perez. What was that experience like?
He's an incredible musician and mind. He doesn't, it's not like he has a method or something like that. He studied with Hal as well when he was younger, and Hal has this like very regimented, very diagnostic approach to teaching, and Danilo's like the complete opposite. Basically, like we would just start, we would maybe play a tune together, kind of free. He would play melodica and I'd play piano or something like that, and then he'd hear something, and then that would become the lesson of the day. Whether it would be like a rhythmic idea or voice leading or orchestration or whatever it is, but it was like a very organic development from just playing, which I thought was so cool. It felt very applicable, right immediately, because it was something that it was related to something that actually just happened, And of course, he's just this super genius with incredible ears and perfect time and all that. So sometimes you have to settle him down because everything just comes so easy to him. You're like, whoa. Like, there's no way I can do that. No way. You have to break it down. I love Danilo. He's probably my favorite modern pianist and one of my biggest influences. So my first couple lessons with him, I could barely speak. I owe a ton to him in my life for sure.
Right on. So then you go on to the Panama Jazz Fest, and talking about heroes, you got Wayne Shorter and Brian Blade. That had to be a huge experience for you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was really special. That was really cool. Yeah, there was like this great young Panamanian tenor player named Yahaziel Arocha. And Danilo, I guess, picked some students to come over and play in the Panama Jazz Festival with Jahaziel. So we came over there, and Wayne's group was playing in the same festival, with Danilo, obviously, and we got to spend some time with them. And Patitucci was there too, of course. He was fantastic. We were hanging out, and we were, of course, asking all these questions about the music. And he was like, "Oh, well, I'll just show you." I remember he went and just grabbed a book of the music and was just like leafing through, showing us different elements of how that band operates, and all of them were just really giving with their knowledge, and really supportive. They could have just definitely holed up in the hotel or whatever, but it was really cool that they were just out all the time, basically. Brian too. Yeah, the drummer in that band that we went over with was Jonathan Pinson, who later on went to the Monk Institute and is now on the road with Stefan Harris. And he actually subbed for Brian in Wayne's band for a tour in Japan, which was kind of crazy, So yeah. I think that trip really meant a lot to all of us. And of course, like above all else, talking to Wayne and getting his input and inspiration, words of wisdom, that's, one of the most important moments of my life, for sure,
Absolutely.
He talked about creativity and originality. He has a very unique way of speaking, very fragmented and a lot of imagery, a lot of sort of non sequiturs, but that are all somehow fit. It's kind of like an oxymoron, but it's like, it seems random, but then when you look back, it all is really tied together. There's only so many guys like that in history, and to get to talk to one and have them, speak to you about what we do, is really special.
Without a doubt. So you moved to New York. What brought you to New York, and what kind of culture shock was that for you?
That's a good question. It was a culture shock, big time. I was actually sort of the first one of my friends to move out there, pretty much. I had a close friend who had graduated a year earlier, this great guitarist named Jeff Miles. He moved out there, so I had somebody. But aside from that, I was getting calls from my friends, weekly, being like, "Oh, what's New York like?" Blah, blah, blah. For me, I was, come on, guys, move out here, because it's actually really hard to get your foot in the door without your crew of people that you've been playing with, I'd been used to playing with the same guys for years. My only experience in New York was from visiting, from Boston every once in a while. So just being around every show I would see would be guys that I'd been listening to on records, and it was just sort of bizarre to see that many of the guys that I, idolized available at all times, basically. They're just playing, yet, they're playing at this club or this club or this club, or, everybody was just around. Culture shock is definitely the right word for me.
Well, and then you get out there, and we kind of talked about this at the top of the interview, but I want to kind of bring it up again. What venue, when you did get there, that you played at kind of blew your mind the first time?
I'm trying to think. The first year I was there or so, I think the level of venue I was playing was pretty low on the totem poles for a while. I mean, there were some great ones that I played, but I guess the first one that really kind of hit me hard was Cornelia Street Cafe, probably.
Yeah.
Because it's such a small and intimate room, and I had seen like some really seen Paul Motion there a few times, and just so many great artists, Mark Turner a lot, and so that was one of the first venues I played in New York, like one of the first major ones, and that definitely made an impact on me. But it also, it was a little bit of a letdown almost, in that it was like, wait, this is just another club, Wait a second, there's like a piano and people come and listen, and and that's it. The gig's over, and it was kind of a strange phenomenon. I guess it's sort of like hero worship, but with venues.
Sure.
Venue worship, and and after that, it just the Blue Note is kind of, it's not really like the same place that it was many years ago. But I'd seen some great acts there too. So, those were the two probably that first hit me.
So, and you've gone on obviously to play bigger venues and with big shots in the jazz world. What do you learn from being around people like Kendrick Scott and Gretchen Parlato and Mark Juliana? What do you get from those kind of veterans?
Well, that was like the first touring experience I had with anyone really, on the real vanguard of the scene. Gretchen, probably against her better judgment at the time, she took me along for the ride with Kendrick and those guys, and I was really fresh out of school. Like, this was, I think, the largest venue I had ever played probably sat like 100 people or something, So for me, this was crazy, like playing the Stockholm Jazz Festival with her and those guys, for thousands of people. That was shocking and very scary. Like, I definitely have never been more scared in my life than those gigs. But the thing that really blew me away about Gretchen and Mark and Alan Hampton and Kendrick was that they were just so incredibly friendly and funny and quick-witted and just great people, great, well-rounded, beautiful people who really, wanted me to be successful and were ready to help at all times, It really helped, because I think they could really pick up that I was, in way over my head at that point, But I think Gretchen, she understands, the young musicians, they need those opportunities, they need to experience that so that you can grow. And then when one comes around again, kind of how to handle it, and there just aren't that many musicians doing that. And that she was willing to take a chance on, I was 21, 22 is crazy and amazing, I'm very, very, very fortunate and very thankful that she was able to do that, Yeah, it changed my life for sure.
Absolutely. Well, you've talked about the great teachers you've had from Hal Crook on all the way down to Danilo. So tell me, how have they influenced your teaching philosophy as a teacher?
Hal definitely has influenced me hugely, because his stuff is all about sort of the pillars, the great truths in jazz, basically, and taking and just music and in general, sort of having balance in your approach, making sure you're not doing too much of one thing, but kind of spreading it around, taking one idea and really sticking with it for a long time, really exploring the idea and developing it, having some character development, if you will, like really, telling a story. So for me, that's the stuff that really resonates. So it's easy for me to get excited about that and to share that with my students, and I try to impart that same sense of wonder that I had when I was working with him. And then with Danilo, it's, studying with him is just like studying with this really excited kid, basically, who's just, he just wants to show you this, show you this, show you this, and that brings its own sense of excitement too, to be around someone who's so enthusiastic and just in love with music. So I try to bring some elements of that, with me too.
Right on. So let me ask you this. We've kind of gone down the nostalgia of who's influenced you and the musicians that you've loved, and you're playing in what the world would consider the cradle of the greatest moments that have ever happened in live jazz. If you could get to a time machine and go see a live show anywhere in the history and the annals of jazz, who would you go see and where would you go?
Oh, wow. I think I would have to say the Coltrane Quartet in the 60s at the Vanguard, I think, would probably be something that, if I could only pick one, that would kind of have to be it. I think in terms of experiencing something, because this music really is supposed to be experienced live for sure. And I think that even though I listen to those records, every day basically, and I feel something very powerful and important, I think probably being in the audience and experiencing that unit would be something that can't translate to recording, Probably that. I mean, I would really love to hear the Duke Ellington Orchestra, in maybe the 40s. I don't know. That's a hard question.
No, that's good. No, Coltrane would be the quintessential. Let me ask you this. Why do you love jazz?
Jazz, over other music, has this potential for expression that a lot of others don't through improvising. All musics require a lot of dedication and practice, but it seems to me the greatest of the jazz improvisers sort of are just true masters, and the amount of hours it takes to reach a point where you can really reflect the human condition and reflect not just your life, but maybe the lives of your friends and family and everything else that's gone into your being through music is really just astounding to me and devastating. So there's just so much respect I have for the people that I look up to. It kind of reminds me of like those old like samurai stories or something like that. These guys who just dedicate so much of their existence to not just their craft, but the sort of philosophy behind the craft. And sometimes I feel like that's missing in a lot of other musics. There's a proficiency, there's an incredible technical ability. It's almost like an athletic thing, but there's so much reflection inherent in jazz. If you're doing it right, in my mind, it needs to come from a long look at yourself and where you've come from and who you are, and not even yourself, but just the world. And if you can reflect that musically, then you win, then you succeed. But in order to do that, it can only come with so much thought and time and effort.
That's a great answer. Yeah, that's a great answer. So let me ask you this. This is my final question. Everybody has their interpretation, their version of who you are, your family, your friends, your business associates, the fans in the crowd. But who do you personally think you are?
Wow. That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I guess, defining yourself that's a lifelong pursuit. Like I was just talking about, finding out really who you are. That's a long thing. I guess, I consider myself a musician and improviser and composer, maybe second to being a cat owner and, a boyfriend and a good friend. I think sure maybe I would consider all those more defining qualities in myself, but just like a curious person, just trying to figure out how all this stuff works.
Absolutely, and that's a lifelong journey for sure. Hey, Julian, Thank you for taking some time out to talk with me today, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. It was great.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Julian for his music and his time. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or you can always visit the neonjazz.blogspot.com for all things Neon Jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.